Hi, everyone. Can you see anything wrong with my nativity scene? Well, there's Mary and baby Jesus, and normally you'd have Joseph and maybe the star, and we have an angel, and we have a shepherd and a sheep, and you could have often a donkey or a cow. And there's the three wise men and a camel. But you know what? There's something that's not quite right about my nativity scene. Mary and Joseph should be there, and of course, baby Jesus in the manger should be there. The angel should be there, the star, the shepherd, and maybe even a sheep or a donkey, and maybe even a cow. But the wise men and their camels, they should not be there. So we're going to move them because the wise men, they actually never made it to the manger scene. In the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew in the Bible, it tells us that there were wise men from the east. And they traveled all the way to Israel because they wanted to see a baby that had been born king of the Jews. The night that Jesus was born, they were out in their home, way in the east, far away, and they were studying the stars in the sky just like they normally did. And suddenly they saw something they had never seen before. It was amazing. It was magnificent. It was wonderful. And they were so excited. It was a star like one they'd never seen before. And they knew it meant something really important. And they also knew what it meant. When they saw that star, they knew it meant that a baby had been born and he was king of the Jews. Right away, they gathered up treasure and they hurried off towards Israel. Now, on my map, it doesn't look like it's very far, but actually it was a long journey for them. Remember, they didn't have airplanes, they didn't have cars, they didn't have trains. They had camels probably because they had to go across a desert, but they had to go on foot. And so it took them between 1 and 2 years to travel from their home all the way to Israel. Now, the wise men had one problem. The problem was that while they knew the king had been born in Israel, they didn't know where he'd been born. They didn't know what town. And so they were heading to the place that they thought made the most sense, the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was under Roman rule. Now, if you remember before, we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. And King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he dreamt of this statue. And the statue was a prophecy of what was to come. And if you recall, Daniel told King Nebuchadnezzar that the head of gold represented Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar, and it was really strong. But Daniel said that empire was going to pass away, and it did. And then the next empire to come was going to be the Medes and the Persians. And they were represented by the silver. And they were going to be not as strong. They were going to be strong, but not as strong as the Persians. And so, as the Babylonians. And so the Persians and the Medes, they did come, and their empire ended as well. Well, the next to come were the Greeks. And they were represented by the bronze. And the Greeks were strong too, but their empire came and left. The last empire was the iron. That was the Roman Empire. And then there was going to be the clay with the mixture of the Roman Empire with the different places. But the Roman Empire was iron. And the legs of iron represented the Rome. And Rome was over Israel right now. And so that's the scene that we find baby Jesus in. And so Rome was ruled by Caesar. And Caesar, he had such a large empire, just like the Babylonians had a large empire, and the Medes and Persians had such a large empire, and the Greeks had such a large empire. And so Caesar had to divide up the empire and have different rulers over different sections. And the section where Jesus was born, Judea, was ruled by a king. And his name was King Herod. So this is our King Herod. So King Herod ruled over Judea, and he ruled in Jerusalem. Now, King Herod really, really liked being king. He liked the power, and he didn't want to lose it. In fact, he was very afraid of losing his power, and he did everything he could not to lose his power. In fact, King Herod actually killed 3 of his own sons because he was afraid they were going to try to take his kingship away from him. Well, it was to this King Herod that the wise men came. And they came looking, they said, for the one who was born King of the Jews. Can you imagine how King Herod felt when he heard that? He was so upset. He was so disturbed. But King Herod was crafty and he was sneaky. And so he called the chief priests of the Jewish people and the religious leaders, the teachers of the law, and he said, you know that Messiah that's supposed to be born? Can you tell me where he's supposed to be born? And so they said, of course we can tell you. The prophet Micah told us that he's going to be born in Bethlehem. So then King Herod secretly called the wise men to himself. And he said, I found out it's in Bethlehem that this king should be born. And I want you to go and search really carefully for this king because I want to go and worship him just like you're going to. Well, King Herod, he was not telling the truth. That is not what he wanted to do. He was lying. His plan was to kill the new king. Well, the wise men didn't know that, and so they headed off towards Bethlehem. And as they were going, they saw something that brought them so much joy. They saw the star again. The star appeared, and it traveled and led them right to the house where Jesus was, with his mother Mary and with Joseph. And so they arrived at the house, and when they saw Mary and baby Jesus, they bowed down and they worshiped baby Jesus. Well, actually, he wasn't baby Jesus anymore because it had been 1 to 2 years. So he was Jesus, the little child. And so they worshiped him, and then they brought out their gifts. And they brought out gifts of gold. They brought gold, and they brought frankincense, and they brought myrrh. Now, there are 2 important points that we can study here. The first is that there were 3 gifts. But that doesn't mean that there were 3 wise men. The Bible doesn't tell us that there were 3 wise men, just that these wise men brought 3 gifts. So there might have been 3 wise men, or there might have been 2 wise men, or there might have even been 6 wise men. Oops. The Bible doesn't tell us. All it tells us is that they brought 3 gifts. But what those gifts were really important. The first gift was gold. And that was because Jesus was the king. And so the gold represented that he was king. The second gift was the frankincense. Now, the frankincense was very special. Frankincense was burned in the temple, and it was burned as an offering to God. And so the frankincense was given because Jesus is God. And when Jesus died on the cross, he became, and rose again, he became a high priest for us, a mediator between us and God. And so the frankincense also represents that. Do you remember recently in the Christmas stories anything about a priest who was offering incense in the temple? That's right, it was Zechariah. Remember, Zechariah was in the temple and he saw the angel Gabriel to the right of the altar of incense. So that's what the incense represented. The third, if you recall, we used this container when Joseph's brothers brought some presents to Joseph, and one of the presents they brought from their land was myrrh. And that was the third gift, myrrh. Now, myrrh reminded us of the fact that Simeon told Mary that a sword would pierce her very soul. You see, myrrh was what people used when people died. And myrrh was pointing to the fact that Jesus, the king and God and our high priest, he was willingly going to die on the cross for our sins to make a way for us to come back to God. So these were the 3 gifts that the wise men brought. Well, the wise men left, and then something really interesting happened. They had a dream. And what they dreamt in their dream was a warning. God told them not to go back to King Herod and to go home a different way. And so they did. Instead of going home by the way that they had come, they went home a different way. Well, after the wise men had left, Joseph also had a dream. And in it, he dreamt of an angel. And the angel said to him, "Go quickly, take Mary and Jesus, and you need to flee to Egypt, because Herod is going to seek out the child and kill him. And don't come back to Israel until I tell you it's safe to come back." And so Joseph, right away, he believed God. And he took Mary and Jesus, and they fled right away to Egypt. Well, when King Herod realized that he had been tricked and outsmarted by the wise men, he was furious. And so he ordered something very terrible. He ordered that all the boys in Bethlehem and in the area around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, and he knew that because of what the wise men told him when they told him when they had seen the star, all those children, 2 years and under, they had to be killed. And you know what? That fulfilled a prophecy that was over 600 years old by the prophet Jeremiah. And it said, "A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they were no more." Well, Joseph and Mary and Jesus stayed in Egypt until Joseph had another dream. You see, it's interesting because the fact that they were in Egypt was another prophecy fulfilled from a prophet 700 years before, Hosea. And he said, "Out of Egypt, I have called my son." And that's exactly what happened. Joseph had a dream, and in the dream, the angel said, "Okay, it's time to come back out of Egypt and go back to Israel, because the people who were trying to kill Jesus, they're dead now." Well, Herod had died, and so Joseph and Mary and Jesus headed back to Israel. But when they got there, Joseph found out that actually the son of Herod, Archelaus, he was reigning in place of his father. And so Joseph was scared to go back to Bethlehem. And he had another dream, and in the dream he was warned not to go back. And so he and Mary and Jesus ended up going back to Nazareth, where they had started. Remember where Mary had first seen Gabriel the angel? So they went back to Nazareth in Galilee, and that too was another fulfillment of prophecy, because the prophet said, "He shall be called a Nazarene." Well, that sums it all up. These were all the things that Mary got to treasure in her heart and think deeply about. Mary got to think deeply about all the things that Gabriel had told her when she first saw Gabriel. She pondered deeply about the things that Joseph had told her about the dreams that he had had. Everything that Elizabeth had told her about her and Zachariah's experiences. Everything the shepherds had come and told her about what they had seen and what they had heard from the angels. And then everything that Simeon and Anna had told them at the temple. And then the 3 wise men and their gifts. Mary had a lot to treasure in her heart and a lot to think deeply about. And I hope that all the things that you've learned this Christmas, I hope that all those things, you treasure them in your heart too, and that you think deeply about them. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.